So I think you can see at the beginning of this video how many flowering things are just going wild out here in our front garden in Raleigh. We were out of town for a couple of weeks for various things, and you come back in and we've lost a little bit of control, really. Normally this happens more like in August. Typically we are really a little drier in the spring overall, and then we'll get some thunderstorms here and there June and July, but typically August is when that rain really kicks in, the afternoon thunderstorms really kick in, and the garden really just kind of, you lose control of weeds, you lose control of the annuals, you lose control of things that, you know, can really get to growing with the right amount of rain and the right amount of sunlight. But this has definitely happened a little bit earlier this year. For the first, May was so cool that the annuals grew kind of slowly. And when we had the open garden June 20th, the annuals were quite a bit smaller this year than they were year over year from the open garden the year before. But since then, it's definitely flipped completely because it's rained enough that they've really gotten the engine going. We have not fertilized out here. So when we fertilized the garden back in February, and then one additional time with an organic fertilizer out here, and that is it. I'm gonna prune this back, and then within a week or two, it's just going to be right back. The main things I need to prune this time right now is going to be, I need to open this path up. Our mailman comes through here, UPS, Amazon, whatever, if we get any kind of delivery here. This is not fun for anybody to walk through because there's bees on everything too, you know, as they come through here. So we'll come through. None of these annuals really care, but we can come through and just go just like this, or like this. Doesn't really matter the approach you use to it. I don't want to cut the actual plant off at the base, obviously, but we'll just kind of sculpt this through here, and they'll be right back very soon without any problem. We'll take this material because it's clean, and we can just throw it back in here into the bed, or we can dispose of it, put it on a compost pile, whatever the heck we want to do. But you can see, I may take something and just hold this lily up like this, possibly, don't know. But anything that's kind of sticking out over this path, and this is down and dirty as I'm showing you this right now. I'll do a better job of it when the camera's not on, but it's just pretty much that. I mean, it's not that much work really at the end of the day, but it does need that. The second thing we'll do is rescue some plants, because I've got, you know, this coleus, as pretty as it is, and it really is beautiful, is laying on this abelia. And what I know here is that in November, this coleus is going to be done, and I'm going to be relying on this abelia back here to be my winter color in the garden, that variegated abelia. So, you know, where I've got this branch that's just on it right there, I'll cut that off, you know, and I can actually just again throw it right back in the plant. I haven't really changed the look of the coleus at all, but I've gotten it off of this abelia and made sure that it's not hurting that for the next few weeks. And that's true. This is going around the garden and doing that all over the place. I just cut along there, and I cut it kind of straight. Normally we don't have the garden with just perfectly straight lines like that, but as fast as those things are growing right now, within a week it'll be back onto the path, which is what we want. I actually want these vinca out here on the path a little bit. I want these zinnias out on the path a bit. The problem is there's a limit to that. This is, you know, we're at the point now where there's basically no path left in a few places. So we'll just kind of go along here, and we can kind of sculpt it one direction or another. This path is actually is pretty straight in reality, but I can use these annuals to actually cut this path to be, you know, a bit of a curve to it, you know. And so, you know, just as down and dirty as I'm talking to a camera here, but I think you get the point. And again, we'll just take all this material here and throw it right back in the beds is typically what we'll do, as long as it's not diseased in some way. Another thing is a few of these celosia are a bit tall, really, for what we want out of them. And I can go, you know, I can come back and take some of the taller ones out because it's blooming lower. So, you know, these absolutely tallest ones, probably not going to do a good job while I'm running my mouth. I need a pair of hand pruners for this particular job. But where it's branched on the side, I can go just above that and it'll bloom right here now instead of being up this tall. And I can do that anywhere I see them branched just below. I can make a cut and reduce the height of this just a little bit because it's up above everything. And it'll just come right back into full flower without sticking up above everything else in the garden. And this is another thing. Okay, so I want to point out something. I have added to the weekly garden planner a garden journal. And the garden journal is going to allow you to basically put in any plants that you've purchased. So let's say we did this celosia from seed, okay? And whatever the name of it is, it allows you to put in when you purchased it, who you got the seed from, what the actual plant is called. It has a botanical name and a common name feature, and then it allows you to give a rating to it and make notes on it. Okay, and so this celosia right here, I probably would go back mid-season and say gets a little taller than I expected it. You know, the package said it was going to get 24 inches tall, and here it was 36 inches tall amongst little, you know, basically ground cover zinnias and ground cover vinca. That doesn't mean I don't want to use it. It just means that I know now that in our garden, this thing gets taller than I probably want it for that particular spot. Okay, it's good. It's the same. So you can enter your shrubs, trees, annuals, things you do from seed, perennials, whatever it is, and manage them, and then export them over to either an Excel file or a printable PDF file. But that's part of the weekly garden planner now. If you're interested in the weekly garden planner, it's $50 off for the month of August, and I'm starting that as of today. So as of today, as you're watching this video. But you can go over to the weekly garden planner on the main page of the weekly garden planner. Those of you who already own it, again, if you own these Learn to Garden video series or the weekly garden planner, as we add these things in the future, you don't have to pay anything for them extra once you own it. But you go down to the garden journal and hit that, and it'll open that page, and you can start to maintain an inventory basically of the things you're doing in your garden and help you with your memory. Keep in mind, you need to export it to an Excel spreadsheet occasionally, because the way it maintains your inventory now is in a catch with your internet browser. So if you clear your browser, you would be clearing the things out of it. So keep that in mind. As long as you're not clearing your browser, it'll maintain your inventory like that. But I would occasionally just hit the export CVS button, which is just a comma separated file, but it opens as an Excel file. And I hope this will help with folks, help our memories, because that's Steph and I's biggest issue, is we can go back and buy the same thing 2 years later, the same annual, the same whatever it is, and then, you know, not remember how aggressive it was, how it seeded itself, just making general notes about the plants that you're purchasing. So hopefully that will help you in your garden. As you're watching me prune a few of these annuals, you know, if I go through here and prune these zinnias back off the path a little bit, right before we left, what we'll do is about a third of the garden at the time. I never want to do them all at the time because we have so many pollinators out here taking advantage of these things that I don't want to disturb them. So right before we left, we knew we were going to be gone for a couple weeks. Steph pruned a few things, and these are two examples of it. This is a celosia that the pollinators absolutely love, and as I'm saying that, a bee is coming around. He's going to land on the salvia, but he came around to this. These typically hold this red color after they've finished their benefit to the pollinators, and so you'll get a lot of pollinators on them, and then all of a sudden the pollinators just kind of drop off because it holds the color. It makes it appear that it's still flowering. But by cutting it right before we left, she basically took this down to just green leaves right before we left. 2 weeks later, it's back into full bloom, and the pollinators are back on it because they're fresh flowers. Same exact thing with this salvia. The salvia has these beautiful calyxes. So the flower, if you come in here, Steph, the flower is here. You see the pink? That's the flower part. The part behind it, that calyx, that part that actually holds that flower onto the plant. In all of this new salvia breeding, these calyxes are beautiful. But what happens is the plant kind of blooms out, and you don't really realize it's not really blooming all that much because it still has that good color from those calyxes. If you see the pollinators drop off, you just cut it. So she cut this basically a third back 2 weeks ago. And now look, it's back in full bloom, and it's covered in pollinators again this morning. We're early morning, and there's still some dew on some things, so we're a little early for this thing to be really getting going this morning. But already there's a few on it. But again, it's actually beneficial to cut some of these things back, especially the things that hold their flower, what looks like they're holding their flowers for an extended period of time. We were up at White Flower Farm and up at Putnam Hill Nursery, a little northeast of here, and the coneflowers, the purple coneflowers, were kind of peak bloom up there. Here, they've kind of passed by a bit, although we'll get a couple flushes here and there where you'll get a few extra flowers, but here they're kind of spent. But this is something I'm not cutting back because the birds are now taking advantage of it. It moved past the phase of it was beautiful for humans into a phase where now it's beautiful for birds. And so while Steph was just filming me cutting this back here, the goldfinches were up here on top of these. And so again, we'll still get a flower here or there. Sometimes they'll be slightly smaller than before, but these seed heads now are extremely valuable to the birds. And so, you know, I'm cutting those annual borders back because I'm trying to regenerate flowers on them for the pollinators. The perennials that are in the garden, especially the native perennials, I don't want to be cutting back because their structure in the garden, number one. So the goal, even if there weren't any seed on here, the birds can still sit on top of them. And then of course, but there are seed on top of them. So my native perennials, even though, you know, it's a bit sketchy looking compared to what it looked like, you know, a few weeks ago when people were here for the open garden. It's got a little bit of powdery mildew on it. It's got all kinds of things going on, but it's now an integral part of the life that takes advantage of this garden. The other thing you're gonna find is some weeds. And so as I'm in here pruning some of the hidden weeds that have been coming up all season that we haven't found, I see a mulberry coming up back to the back of this. I see a porcelain berry right there trying to come up through the middle of this salvia. And the other thing, again, I see is that there's an osmanthus here that was planted this season, a Goshiki osmanthus, plant we've talked about quite a bit on the channel over the years. It's actually got some new growth on it, looking pretty good, except for Steph cut around this thing right before we left. And just that quick, it came right back and started getting eaten again. And we just don't want these temporary pieces to be hurting our permanent pieces out here in the garden. And I can cut that back a little bit further. I can sculpt around it a bit too, more like that. But I'm just, for the point of this video, just showing you that I need to make sure that that plant is not being damaged by these extremely fast growing summer annuals. I've talked about the rabbit and deer damage out here this season, which has been particularly bad. Normally, I mean, we have about the only wooded space in our entire neighborhood. It's directly behind us. We feel super lucky to have it, you know, to not have a house that's just literally right to the property line behind us, because the houses that get built in here now are 3 stories high. It would be almost impossible. We'd have to use up a third of this backyard to grow plants tall enough to screen something that would get put in there. That's what would get built back there. So we're lucky for now. You know, life, you know, life turns and twists, and someday probably there'll be something back here. Who knows? But having the only wooded space back there has allowed a deer to just move in this season. Normally, I think they come from Meredith College is close to us, and there's a trail that runs, basically interconnects the entire city over there And I think occasionally a deer gets over here to this little wooded space, but then a dog's bark and something scares it off and they move on. And so what we get is kind of a rotating deer that comes through here, a different one. And they do a little damage and they move on. This year, something has moved in and I cannot get it on film. I cannot figure out what time of night it is. It must be just the absolute middle of the night. I've got lights and water blasting and all kinds of things and sprays and everything else, but we continue to get some damage, especially being gone 2 weeks without our, having our defenses up during that time. We did take some damage. So a deciduous azalea here really got eaten down. The big problem with this is this has no time to reset its flower buds. It's got a flower bud right there that's forming for next year, and up here at the top, same thing, a few clusters of flowers forming. But this right here is too late. These rhododendrons, native azaleas need months and months and months to form those flower buds before they go dormant, and then they open those flowers in the spring. The toad lily here got eaten. I think this was actually before we had left, right, Steph? It was all about these toad lily, which is so strange because thus far it's ignored the hosta sitting right next to something. Does the azalea and the toad lily look more appetizing than all the hosta out here? I don't really get that, but okay, whatever. Glad they're not eating the hosta, obviously, but it's kind of strange. Begonias. These begonias were up about this tall, full of white flowers before we left. There's a red bud that's a weed if you don't want it there, right? Native plant, but a weed if you don't want it there. But they ate every one of these begonias to the ground while we were gone. That actually possibly is rabbits, but I don't know. But again, we've been in the fight this year, it seems like, for the whole season on these critters in the garden. And again, eating strange things, really. At the end of the day, stepped over 5 things over in one spot to eat in patience. I have no idea why. I mean, of all the things that are out here that look to me to be leafy and tasty, the impatiens wouldn't be at the top of my list. And certainly that toad lily and that the woody azalea doesn't seem like that would be on the list either. But they're picking it for whatever reason. This is what this deer likes. I hope at some point, maybe when the leaves drop off in the fall, we can get this one out of here and get it flushed out. Once it's open and you can see back there, they may be less comfortable and they'll move on. On the new garden journaling app, you can also make notes on, you might want to move something to another place the next year. So we use these ping pong gomphrena every year. They're fantastic plants. And out in the front garden last year, they were one of the main pieces we had, the white version of this. We put them back here, and back here, the shade takes over this back garden an hour or two earlier than that front garden. And right along this patio, it has stayed a little bit wetter with this additional rain, and these gomphrena look terrible. Same plants, same everything, except for we moved them from one spot to another spot. So that's the kind of note I would take. I don't want to get rid of these gomphrena because they perform incredibly well in the garden. The pollinators really love them. They bloom. Gosh, it was November last year and the gomphrena were still blooming. This is not the spot for them. So you can see leaf spot issues on them. You can see just the overall decline where they're staying too wet. So we're going to pull those out and again make a note that the gomphrena doesn't belong along the back patio next year, and we'll move them back to the front. The kufia growing up through the cordyline continues to look great, but I wanted to show this shimmer kufia that's in the lower container. Ignore the opal basil. It just does not look as great with the 100-degree temperatures really set that back. But this particular kufia is so good. Look how much smaller that flower is than the kufia that's directly above it. So this one you might pick because it has a slightly showier flower, but look at all the little flowers on that particular one. So really loving that. Containers are another area where we need to go back and rescue some plants. So if you have any permanent thing, there's a little cryptomeria growing in the middle of that container that I'm just trying to get a couple years out of in a container. It'll be bigger, better, fuller next year. But I got to make sure that during this season that Kufia and that basil, and there's a coleus in there, is not going to hurt that. So, you know, I just do that. It's no big deal. I don't even need to cut on them. A lot of times I can just kind of put a little weight on them and lean them away from it, and that's good enough. But that's the kind of thing coming back into the garden after 2 weeks that we're looking for. Just little subtle things to make sure that the permanent pieces in the garden are working okay, and then resetting some of the annuals, because again, it may look like they're still, some of them are still blooming heavily, but you might notice a drop in the pollinator count overall. But we can resculpt them. And again, I fertilize. I can't say this enough. I fertilize based on observation. So if we came back home and it appeared that those annuals in the front border had just not grown a lot, and that they were just kind of stagnant, maybe a little off color, whatever it is, I'd be fertilizing them. But instead I came back home and they had eaten the path to the point where the mailman can't deliver the mail, almost. You know, we were this close to ending our mail, right? So I'm basing it on that observation. If we now that we've cut them back, we go another 2 weeks and they'll be back out there, or they won't. And if they aren't, then we'll fertilize them at that time. So again, it's always fertilizer based on observation. The other thing about that is we've gotten to the point now where we had amended the soil so much that a lot of those nutrients are available, you know, just from the soil life. You may be earlier in the stages of building your soil, you know, or you didn't go through the process of putting wood chips down or something like that, and you're building soil just in a much slower way by mulching over the years, which at my old house, that's what I did. And it took 20 years to build, you know, a decent amount of compost, and that's fine. It's a perfectly fine way to do it. But keep in mind, you may have to do a little bit more fertilizing in that particular case, you know, in the early stages of your vegetable garden and your annuals. But we're at the point now where we haven't refertilized the vegetable garden. We haven't refertilized any of these annuals. Haven't even refertilized one of these containers yet the entire season. Because again, you know, why would I when they're eating the plants that are in the middle of the containers? At some point, maybe. And we'll show that in a video if we do. Thanks for watching.